Hey there, and welcome back to Tax Fun with Taxium, where we take the mystery out of sales tax and sprinkle a little fun while we're at it. I'm your host, Amanda, and today we're continuing our deep dive into one of the trickiest and most overlooked areas in sales tax compliance, assessing product and service taxability. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Didn't we already cover that in the previous episode? Well, yes and no. Previously, we talked about how taxability varies and what businesses need to do to navigate that. Today, we're digging deeper into what products and services actually are in the eyes of the authorities, when those definitions matter, and most importantly, the common traps businesses fall into. And as always, I've got my partner in tax compliance here with me, Ronald. Ronald, I want to start with something deceptively simple. What do tax jurisdictions mean when they say product or service? Like, what actually counts as a product? What counts as a service? Because I have a feeling the legal definitions don't always match our day-to-day understanding.
Yeah, thanks for hopping on. And I'm glad we're partners in compliance, not partners in crime. I don't want to go to jail, so. Good question. So I think from the state's perspective, there's no functional difference between a product or a service, right? How companies should look at this as a thing you're selling. That thing could be a product or a service or a warranty or something else. But all the states want to know is, what did you sell? What caused you to move money one way or the other? And then you're going to have to define it on their terms. But as far as, if you're selling something, they don't really care what it is, product, service, or otherwise, but you're going to have to know that what you're selling in relation to how they expect that to be taxed.
Ooh, good answer. And here's a follow-up. What about digital products? Do they sit in their own little category, or are they treated as a type of product or a service depending on the state?
Great question. And I think where companies need to be real careful is we don't want to put too many things into categories ourselves. I'm not saying there aren't categories, there definitely are, but there are too many for one person to be able to consume all of those. So a better approach would be to find some process that accounts for all these things. So when it comes to digital software, products, services, tangible goods, whatever your tax process is, should cover the assessing of the taxability of each of those things. You shouldn't need to account for digital products, its taxability separately than how you account for the taxability of a service or something else.
Interesting. Next question. We always talk about taxability, but when does a business actually need to assess that? Is it only once during product setup, or does it need to be reevaluated over time?
This is a great question. So, at a high level, folks should probably start looking into this stuff before they hit Nexus, before they've created a new product. Because you want to go in eyes wide open, understanding the taxability of whatever moves you're making, products you're adding, services you're creating. Because you don't want to go in and then charge a customer or not charge a customer tax based on some assumptions. Then your client comes back and says, hey, your competitor was charging us 2% tax. Or we're buying in Texas and that tax is only 80% and not the full amount. So I'm going to pull up a really fun example here. So once you've kind of settled on what you're going to be selling, it would be good to reference that, to cross-reference that with what the state, is expecting and thinking. So I'm going to bring up two very similar but different things, data services and information services. They sound exactly the same, but as you can see here in Texas taxes data services not at 100% of the regular tax rate, but only 80% of the regular rate. And then on the information services side, there's no taxes at all. That's not to say that businesses should go and try to figure out ways to make their products seem not taxable, but you should know that if you're offering data type services, those might be taxable. If you're not taxing your client, not knowing is no excuse. But as you're creating these new products, new services, someone should be going to look to see what the taxability is so you can then configure your systems or processes accordingly.
Absolutely. I feel like that should be our tagline. Not knowing is no excuse.
Yeah. That can be next. It can apply to everything, life, taxes, all of it.
Okay. So let's say I'm launching a new service line. Should I assume it's taxed the same way as my current offerings, or is it possible, even likely, that it's treated differently?
Good question. I just remembered I missed part of your prior question. So you asked me about getting things set up initially and then the ongoing checks, or do they just set it and forget it? There should definitely be some ongoing process because, as we're seeing, states change their rules all the time. Software didn't used to be taxable anywhere. Now it's taxable in quite a few places. So any given day, given moment, anything could change. So someone should be having eyes on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sorry, give me your next question again.
Oh, if I'm launching a new service line, should I assume it's taxed the same way as my current offerings, or is it possible or even likely that it's treated differently?
One should never assume when it comes to taxes. When in doubt, go ask somebody or verify it.
Absolutely.
If you don't
Great
have any,
answer.
hey, thanks. Hit up Axiom, or if you like a little bit of pain, call the states directly, and hopefully you get somebody who knows enough to tell you the answer, or you can dig through the portal. But yeah, definitely go verify just so you're sure.
Perfect. Okay, so you mentioned in a previous episode that states are all over the place when it comes to services. Can you give us a real world example? Maybe something that seems non-taxable but gets taxed in surprising places?
Ooh, yeah. What kind of services? You mean just any kind?
Any kind.
Yeah. I'm going to show you my screen here. I'm going to do you one better, and we're going to look at all of these at once. Give me a kind of service.
A kind of service.
Yeah, I've got a little matrix that I reference.
How about we do repairs and maintenance?
Repairs. Awesome. There's a lot of different kinds of repair. So I'm going to just pull one of them up here. But this is the fun, is that it's not just you got to tax on repairs, right? You're not offering repairs. People are offering roofing repairs, computer repairs, clothing repairs, glasses repairs. And depending on the jurisdiction, these could all be looked at differently. And so I am going to pull up just automotive repair. I've been thinking about my car situation lately. This is a good one to poke at. And give me one quick second here to share my screen. Here we go. So we're going to look at automotive repair, the taxability, and all the jurisdictions. And so the ones in this tan color are exempt. The white's taxable. But you can kind of see how this varies by state. Arizona is exempt. Arkansas, it's taxable. Connecticut, it's taxable. DC, it's taxable. Hawaii is taxable at a special rate. And this is where it becomes so difficult, is that so many of these states treat these things differently. And this is just one specific, category, if you will. When it comes to all the different products, services, bundled things that people could sell, keeping track of this stuff really becomes a nightmare, which is where having a sound process or tool set in place really helps to manage all this.
Well said.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. Just like looking at this, and this is wild.
Damn, this is just one thing, the one offering.
Mm-hmm. And then if we change that was automotive services. I'm sure that would be much different if we looked at like SaaS services or computer installation, whatever services.
Yeah. What about hybrid offerings? Like when a business sells a mix of services and products in one transaction, how do you assess the taxability in that kind of situation?
For sure. Sales tax is definitely a cat and mouse game in a lot of ways. So as businesses become more creative with how they do their operations and expand their dealings, states play catch up in a lot of regards. So I think this was one of those. So the states, they call it bundling things. So it used to be before, people they're supposed to assess tax per line item, per thing, assess it individually, and then they get a result. Some folks, for whatever reason, had the need to bundle products. I think some of them were trying to be crafty and maybe getting around having to tax stuff. But then other, standard use cases came up. So now the state says, well, if you're bundling things together, we can't see those individual component parts. All we're seeing is basically the bundle, whatever that is. So if any part of the bundle is taxable, the whole bundle is taxable. Right. So nothing wrong with doing it that way, but just go in eyes wide open when you're creating these new product and service offerings, that if any part of that is taxable, that whole lump sum of that line item is going to be taxable.
I think that makes sense in a hurt your head kind of way.
Yeah. Right.
All right. I have a specific one for you. Say I'm selling software. Sometimes it's a physical install disk. Sometimes it's a download, and other times it's cloud-based or SaaS. That's three different formats for what looks like the same thing to a customer, but I'm guessing that the tax treatment is not the same.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And how you would solve something like that using technology is by having different SKUs or part numbers for each of those. So you could then assess tax, independently for each of those, because you're spot on. They're not treated the same. But if folks don't know that, they're going to have basically one line item and be like, hey, well, how do I tax it in this use case? How do I tax it in this use case for this customer in this state? And it becomes logistical, tracking nightmare trying to figure out how to operationalize that for all these different states and use cases. But yeah, with the right tools, very easy if you know how. But if you don't know, this is where a lot of folks get in trouble because they assume that the taxability for use case 1 and state 1 is going to be the same for use case 2 and state 2. And it's not always.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking, I don't know if we're going to get the horror stories, but it made me think of one. I had a client one time. They were doing, data information services type stuff. They got audited. When the auditor looked at some of their invoices, the invoices said information services, nice. Right? But then when they were describing the thing to the auditor, they described it in a way that was data services. So folks got to be ultra careful of, what you're representing and make sure you understand the taxability, because you can't call something one thing and then when the piper comes, say, oh, no, I actually meant it was this. I know I said I was showing a picture of Britney Spears for $12 and $2 in tax. It was actually, a Taylor Swift whatever for $10,000.
We love both Britney and Taylor around here.
No shame here.
Okay, so why is this such a big deal? What happens if a business gets this wrong and say they treat a taxable service as exempt or vice versa? Are we talking penalties, refund requests?
For sure. And there's only one way to do sales tax properly, and that's to do it properly. There's no measures. So, if the goal is to get compliance right, let me rephrase that. The goal is either to get it exactly right, or if that's not your goal, then you should be okay with it being wrong, right? Hopefully you're not okay with it being wrong, but you should definitely be striving to get all these little things right. Because to answer your question, this only really matters in the time of an audit. But by the time the audit comes around, the state's got some indication that something looks a little off. They're going to go digging in, looking for gold. And in all likelihood, for most companies, they're going to find it. So much data, so many audits, this stuff is so complicated. It's very unlikely that the average company is going to be able to get away scot-free unless they've proactively set up their sales tax infrastructure and processes in a way to keep them clean moving.
Yeah, these are all very good points.
I figured you were to come on ready to play Stump the Chump, but just stay ready.
Oh, I'm still playing.
I'm gonna hang up.
So for folks using automation tools to calculate sales tax, how much of this is handled for you? Do platforms like Avalara or TaxJars just know what's taxable, or do you still need to make judgment calls?
Yeah, great question. All these tools are the same in some regard. They're just tools. Even some of the ones that do more for you on their own need some kind of direction. I don't know how far away we are from the point where the robots are going to automate all of our jobs and reconciliations and talking to lawyers and all that. But until then, it's always going to have to be some kind of manual oversight and direction involved. And so these tools, they'll do exactly what they're told, but that's it. Not an inch more or less. So most folks assume that setting up one time, they're good to go. But no, as the laws change, as things get updated, new products, new services, new nexus, new exempt customers, new random exempt scenarios, one-time exempt purchases, partial exemptions in random states, all these things can trigger these tools needing to be updated or tweaked in some way to make sure they're constantly matched to your changing compliance needs.
Yeah, sounds very complicated.
It's a lot, and again, there's a lot of smart people out there. It's not that nobody could figure this stuff out. It's just that for the average person in finance or e-commerce, they got better things to do. Sitting on the phone 4, 5, 8 hours with Avalara, Vertex, TaxJar to figure out the nuances of this or that, because people weren't specifically trained in this stuff. there's a better use of their time. They could outsource this to a company like us and then go do their regular jobs. Most folks don't think about the added cost when they add a tax automation solution. And, there's a lot of things to keep up with, and you just want to make sure that what you're investing into doesn't cost you more than you intended.
Mm-hmm. All right. Are we ready to shift gears and talk about product catalogs?
Yeah.
All right. What role does good product categorization, that was a hard word to say, play in accurate taxability assessment? Have you seen Billy?
Is that one of your friends?
Yeah. Words are hard. Have you seen businesses run into problems because they miscategorize something?
For sure. Absolutely. I mean, you don't want to get taxes wrong on either side, either overcharging or undercharging.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some folks think that whatever, the states are going to get money if I overcharge tax to my customer. What does the state care? They're just getting more revenue dollars. But most states want it to be exactly right. I can't speak for all 50 states personally. They're not all here with me, but I'm pretty confident in saying no state's going to be mad at you for following their rules to the letter of the law. And if that means you don't pay them as much money, great, it's their rules, but I've seen folks get audited for charging tax on things like software when they shouldn't have. And the state basically said, hey, you paid us too much money for the things that you say you're selling. Now we're going to audit you because you got it so wrong.
Yeah. All right, here's a tricky one. What about items that fall into multiple categories, like a subscription that includes digital downloads, webinars, and some physical swag? Is there a framework or best practice for breaking that down?
Yeah, and I think I kind of sidestep your first question, but in general, folks should be, keep a hold of all these products and categories. You and I have both gone through and done some item code mapping to assess the taxability of individual, product sets one by one. It takes a bit of time, but you learn a lot. Most companies, they may have 1,000 products, but maybe only 10 individual product categories. And so once you kind of have that base knowledge, that foundation of knowledge, as moving forward, as you add new products, you're going to know, oh, this is a whatever widget. It belongs in tax bucket 1. This is a whatever widget. It belongs in tax bucket 5. Oh, we don't have a tax bucket for this new widget. Let's create a new category for it. But again, back to the people and tools, it's a combination, because keeping track of this stuff manually for most companies, it's too much work. Folks just give up on it. They don't actually do it. They assume that whatever's in QuickBooks or Shopify or whatever is the right tax, and they just move on and don't realize until it's too late and after the fact. But, with the right tools, the right people or peoples can keep track of this with technology to make sure that as new products, services are added, that we understand the taxability implications.
Personally, I like peoples. I think that's the best way to say it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can't let us move on without talking about exemptions. We're going to call out our last episode. Sometimes it's not that the product or service is non-taxable, but that the buyer qualifies for an exemption. How does that factor into the assessment process?
Yeah, with what we're talking about more on the product service side, they're two separate things. I hear lots of folks talk about, well, we're only going to do this in this state because we don't have Nexus, and we're going to do things differently in this state because we do, or this or that, wholesale customers here, which is not technically incorrect, but trying to operationalize and keep track of all those different processes and procedures per product, per state, per exempt customer. It's a lot, So I would say put in the same standard processes across the board as best you can, and then just do that moving forward. So when it comes to your exempt customer, whether or not the product is exempt or taxable in that thing, in that jurisdiction, you should still be asking people along the way just to make sure. Because how often do we see that clients buy stuff, come back a month later and say, oh yeah, I had an exemption, by the way, can I get a refund?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you might have sold to them 10 times before, but that one time they just have a random refund or the random exemption that they may have just got, or who knows what happened, right? Just, having that process, whether it's a checkbox on the website in the shopping cart, if you're exempt, click here. Or if it's, you do manual sales, having your salesperson, just by the way, are y'all exempt? Just want to make sure, quick question, but it's going to save a lot of trouble moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. And even if you know that everything is going that you're going to sell to them as exempt or non-taxable right now, you should
Mhm.
still collect that exemption certificate because that taxability is changing all the time. What's non-taxable today may be taxable tomorrow or next month.
Sure. For sure.
Okay, so let's play tax mythbusters for a second. I want to throw a few common assumptions at you and you tell me if they're true or false and why. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. First, if a product isn't taxed in my home state, it won't be taxed anywhere else.
False.
Why?
Oh, well, because there's no one size fits all to sales tax. And I mean, I'm sure there are some states, I'm sure there are some product services that share the same taxability across every jurisdiction. I just couldn't name any.
Oh, yeah. And it's very few and far between.
Right.
Okay. Services are generally non taxable unless clearly stated otherwise.
I would say that question is the wrong question. Right. We don't want to go in assuming any taxability about anything. We want to go in asking what the state's taxability is for this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Assume services are generally not taxable in Texas, Connecticut, wherever, then as I do business in those states, I'm going to be like, well, it wasn't taxable last time in Texas. It's probably not taxable in Florida, Connecticut. I'm just not going to tax it. But every time we should be going to look at the specific taxability in the jurisdiction. If you've got software, it'll do it for you. But if not, then yeah, definitely check by hand because you don't want to guess wrong that one time and have it come bite you in the rear.
Yeah. So would you say that statement was true or false?
I would say that is erroneous on both counts.
Okay. Digital products are always taxed like physical ones. True or false?
Same thing. I would say that question is it's the wrong question to ask. It should be, what is the taxability?
I agree. Ooh, how about this one? If I'm not charging tax, I'm not responsible for it.
Definitely not true. It's both up to the buyer and the seller to make sure they properly comply with sales tax law. So definitely don't put that on somebody else. Because if that piper comes around, you're dealing with use tax or exemptions as a buyer of something. You don't want to be caught, flat-footed, be like, I just thought Joe Schmo was going to do it. Like, oh, that's not going to fly. Please give us $1 million and name your first child after us.
Yeah, but spell their names right.
Yeah, good luck.
Okay, last one. Sales tax software means I don't need to worry about product setup.
Definitely hard false. Is that a thing? Hard false? Like hard pass?
I'm going to say hard false is a thing.
Yeah. While these sales tax software companies, Avalar, Vertex, Taxjar, Sovos, Saratax, Anrock, Thompson Reuters, Numeral. How many more can I name? Did I miss any?
Actually.
Whoops, sorry. All at the end of the day, just software, right? Yeah. They basically do very similar things to a degree. Some will do more for you than others as far as, white glove service, managed services, this or that. At the end of the day, they're all software, and we are not at a point in civilization, especially not taxes, where we are going to allow the software to run everything about everything.
Yeah.
There's always going to be some kind of manual intervention touch point at some point for the foreseeable future. So not saying people don't need software, highly recommended, but also don't think that the software is going to just be your tax department. It's a tool of your tax department, but it's not going to replace everything. So you still need that tax expertise to run and guide the tool.
Right. Yeah. And let's not forget this whole having to assess taxability for every state, county, city is fairly new. It was only just a few years ago where you only calculated that tax if you were physically in that place at that storefront. So, but not knowing is not an excuse.
For sure. With things like click-through nexus, affiliate nexus, the states are expanding their rules. They're looking for more revenue streams. And so just sure that your processes and tools allow for you to stay up to date with all these changes that are coming.
Yeah. All right. So we're heading towards the finish line here. But before we go, I want to ask, what are some best practices businesses can adopt today to avoid common taxability mistakes?
Yeah. You and I spent some time in sales throughout our career, and what made us such great salespeople was businesses will get to a point where the pain is going to dictate their action. And so, we were never trying to like sell them anything. It was more a question of timing
Mm-hmm.
because your situation is going to dictate your action. So if you're selling one product to one customer in one state, easy enough to track, right? As you expand to multiple products, multiple customers, multiple states, folks got to be very honest about how good they're doing these things. It's very easy when nobody's looking to say, it's good enough, right? But are you doing it 100% right? And if not, that's the time to look at, okay, maybe I should talk to an outside firm like Taxium, or maybe we don't need managed services. Maybe we just need a little bit of software and our current personnel can run things. But whatever that is, there's a point in time where folks, should look at what they're doing and then make adjustments.
Okay. For newer businesses that are just getting started, do you have any advice for building taxability assessment into their product launch or service rollout processes?
Yeah. I mean, for those newer companies, it used to be that enterprise grade software like an Avalara or a Vertex was super expensive. It's come down a good bit. So even for small companies, I'd recommend looping that into your tech stack and your processes ahead of time so you understand how to grow with it. And then when things like what you talked about come up, you know how to leverage the technology to find some of these answers. And then you can just build that in and make sure that the new product codes, the new tax settings for whatever as you grow, the technology is properly aligned with that and facilitating that for you as you move forward.
Right. All right. Is there anything else you want to throw in before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. This has been we talked so long.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover. And honestly, we could talk about this probably for multiple days.
Oh, we will. Don't you worry.
Okay. So before we wrap up, it wouldn't be Tax Fun with Taxium without a dad joke to lighten things up.
Let's do it.
So, Ronald, why did the service start dating a product?
Why?
Because it heard they were a total package. But then they broke up when the state taxed their relationship as a bundled transaction.
Wow. This is what we say to that. For those of you watching on YouTube, got a little puppy dog appearance. He came and showed his little tiny unimpressed face. But, I love it.
Oh, he's sweet. All right, folks, that's all for today's episode of Tax Fun with Taxium. Huge thanks to Ronald for fielding my rapid fire tax questions. Hopefully, you're walking away with a better understanding of what you sell, how it's classified, and why it matters so much in the world of sales tax. If you found this episode helpful or you just enjoy watching Ronald squirm under my barrage of questions, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's still figuring out if their downloadable knitting patterns are taxable.
Yeah, you can tell your mom they're not. Just kidding.
My mom doesn't knit.
I'm leaving this part in, by the way.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Later.
Well, we will see you next week and have a great rest of your day. Oops. You got this.